This panel is going to be moderated by Faisal. Again, from a digital health and life sciences space, the title is Rewiring Medicine, Neurotech, AI, and the Future of Human-Machine Interfaces. Some great speakers, and with that, I hope that you find this very insightful, and I now turn it over to Faisal to introduce his speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Anika. So it's an honor for me to introduce these four amazing CEOs. We're going to talk about neurotech, brain, and a lot of interesting concepts. With that, I would like to invite Matt, Ramses, Connor, and David on the stage. So it's kind of overwhelming for me because I consider myself a smart guy, but these guys are really geniuses. So it will be a pleasure to get to know them, what they are doing, what they are building. And we're going to talk about neurotech, brain, and what to expect in the future in the next 5, 10, 15 years. With that said, I will go one by one. If you can introduce yourself, your background, what your company does, and what problem you're trying to solve, starting with Matt.
I'm Matt. I'm the founder and CEO of Paradromics. We're a high data rate brain-computer interface company. And so what we do is we build implantable modems that can go into the brain and read out brain activity and make it accessible to a computer, or take information from a computer and make it accessible to a brain. And our emphasis is on data rate for doing things like helping people who have lost the ability to speak due to paralysis to speak again, helping people who have lost the ability to see or to move, to do those things again. And those require a lot of information, and the best way to get information in and out of the brain is to go straight into the brain and record and stimulate individual neurons. And so that's our technology.
Thank you. Ramses?
Yes. Testing. Okay. Excellent. I think the best way to kind of describe what we work on is I'll ask an audience question real quick. How many of you guys have like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, some sort of wearable device? Awesome. So the thing that makes these devices so revolutionary is that it's the first time in human history that we can track the body at scale, which means millions of people in real time. Like as you do exercise, you can see how your body changes. And then longitudinally, which is over days, weeks, months worth of data. Right? And there isn't even clinical trials with that amount of data. But the thing is, we also have our most important organ in our body, which is our brain, right? And we're not tracking that, but what it ties to is things like neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, et cetera. And the reason we don't track the brain is because normally you need these like large head cap systems to really get good data from the brain. So our company, Neurable, works on how do we increase the signal to noise, so instead of having to have one of these large head cap systems, you can bring it down to an everyday device like a pair of noise-canceling headphones with EEG sensors on the inside and still retain really high-quality data. So we primarily work with the US Army. So their helmets are going to start to have neurosensors inside them for traumatic brain injuries. And then we just started our partnerships with consumer brands. So this one's for Master and Dynamic. And we also just announced a partnership with HP. But very soon, just like your Apple Watch has a heart rate sensor on it, very soon your Apple AirPods, your headphones are going to start to have brain sensors in it, and they're going to be able to track the most important diseases that affect you.
All right. My name's Connor. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Phantom Neuro. I have a medical background, so I'm a medical doctor by training, and I did a bunch of research on how to connect humans and machines through the peripheral nervous system and the limbs. And so we're working on muscle-computer interfaces rather than brain-computer interfaces. So sensor systems designed to interface with the limbs, primarily in a armband fashion. So we have a wearable armband, and we have an implantable armband. And really what we're trying to accomplish is how you can get a higher bandwidth communication kind of portal to machines so that you can control these machines. It's actually really hard to get data out of the body in order to use that data in a stable way to interact with computers. And where you really see this problem rear its head, it's kind of in three different scenarios. One is in the setting of injury, where people maybe are missing their limbs or have some kind of a neural injury that prevents them from being able to move around or interact or talk or whatever it might be. The second is when you have really complicated machines that you're trying to control, where you end up having to have these very large control consoles with buttons and switches and screens and all of these things. things. And then the third is when you're trying to interact with a whole bunch of different types of machines, more or less at the same time, where you have to have different control interfaces for each of those different machines. And so we've built out a suite of technologies kind of to focus on those different scenarios. And so we have an implantable system for medical applications, and we're working primarily with upper limb amputees in order to allow them to control robotic prosthetic limbs. And they have wearable technologies that we're working on with the military to interact with different types of machines in that scenario. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm David. I'm the founder and CEO of Sensei. At Sensei, the problem that we're focused on solving is the fact that within the a mental health space, there's really no accurate or objective way to do anything whatsoever. The analog I always use is kind of the standard of care in mental health today is basically the equivalent of diagnosing someone with diabetes but never measuring their A1C. It's completely subjective. It's based on these kind of questionnaires. And it's not that mental health is actually an invisible thing. It's just that we don't really have large and scalable ways, or I should say, small and scalable ways of measuring mental health at scale. And so what we're working on at Sensei is the first diagnostic and severity monitoring platform for mental health with an initial focus on anxiety, depression, and PTSD. And our product is essentially a eye tracking app on a mobile phone. It's about a 10.5-minute test. We show different types of ocular stimuli on the screen of the phone while we videotape your eye's response to it. And then on the other side of that, we spit out to the clinician a binary diagnosis and a severity score. And what's really interesting, at least to us, is that from a neuroscience perspective, very little of this is actually new. Almost everything that we're doing has been very well established in scientific literature for about 35 years now. The problem has been in order to make any of this work, you would traditionally need a couple $100,000 worth of eye tracking equipment because there are many things in the eye you have to measure, and not even one single eye tracker is able to. And so our breakthrough is less about the fundamental neuroscience, and it's more that we've been able to build the computer vision to do with the front-facing camera of a cell phone what you normally need a couple $100,000 worth of equipment for, and that's now allowing us to kind of operationalize a lot of what's been in the existing science for a long time.
Very impressive, very like wide range and broad range of problems that each of you is solving. So when growing up, I used to hear space is the next final frontier. For me, like also thinking is the brain is the final frontier. How much of the brain or neuro technology we understand right now, function we understand right now. And if you break it down, I see three things. One is the sensing part, like we have the sensors, then the algorithm, which is AI algorithms, and then the biological functions. So each of these are playing a role, and the advancement is accelerating. So for each of you, my question would be, what is the key differentiator right now? Is it we have better algorithms? Brain signal, as I think Ramses mentioned, is noisy. So is it that we have better AI, better signal processing, better sensors, that we are seeing a very tangible progress right now?
I think one of the big things is just paradigmatic. So the early stage of many things is just gut feel, witch doctory, and silly business. And then people approach it from a scientific approach and try to understand like what are the underlying systems, what's the underlying data. We've had a lot of advances in neuroscience over the last 50 years to understand how the brain works and what the sort of underpinnings of cognition, sensation, movement are. But we haven't had a lot of success translating that science into neuromedicine. And I think that's kind of what David was saying. And my opinion, one of the big shifts is just the idea that we actually have, even though the brain is a huge mysterious place and there are a lot of things we don't know about it, we've accumulated enough information now to move into a sort of empirical and engineering focused mindset where we can focus on the data we have and creating therapies today based on what we know today and move forward in a data-driven way. And I think that's what's happening now is we see that we have really powerful AI tools, really powerful sensors, whether it's implantable or on your earphones or looking at things like pupil dilation or looking at muscle signals. We have really powerful technologies right now. It's just a matter of let's stop kind of like putting our finger to the wind and guessing at it, and let's use data and let's use engineering to tackle neuro problems.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm just going to say is I'm going to build off of what you just said, because I wholeheartily agree with what Matt is saying. And I'll also add that like it's also been a consolidation of growth across numerous fields. So like battery and compute is finally there, right? Dry electrodes are finally capable and not absolute trash, you know? There's all these other technologies that have been evolving over time and coming together, and now we're getting to the point where we can use these large compute models and create foundational models of different brain responses, create avatars of your brain, right? And then from there, you know, that's the evolutionary step of data, right? You start with collecting the data reliably, then you go to analyzing the data, then you go to simulating the data. And as soon as you can simulate it, you can take that simulation and apply it back to a real system and see how things would manipulate it. And one example of this that we're working on right now is with one of our partners is that they have students with ADHD, and they'll take medication, and then you'll see how their brain waves change with and without medication. Well, now that you can simulate that response, now you can apply it to what another person's EEG brain response would look like and see how could this medication potentially look like in another person, right? And what does that mean? It means that you can fine-tune dosages. It means that you can preemptively see, like, is this something that would benefit from ADHD drug 1, 2, or 3, right? And so, as Matt is saying, we're just at this like precipice where data is finally getting to the point that we can start to evolve the pipeline of what data can give us as a society.
Yeah, I don't have anything too deep to add to what these really smart people just said, but I would say that it's probably less sexy innovations that have now enabled us to do what we're doing. So, like I think all four of us have said, the science of what we're all up here trying to do has been demonstrated in a laboratory environment for a really long time. There's been billions of dollars from DARPA, NIH, and other institutions poured into this field to kind of demonstrate the feasibility of these different systems. But it's just now that these innovations in like batteries, wireless communications, hermetic encapsulation, dry electrodes, the less sexy things have all gotten to the level that now these things can move out of a laboratory environment to an at-home environment, right? And so for Ramsey's, for example, like you could probably have gone to a lab and put on a really complicated EEG cap and done, you know, these signal recordings and stuff at an MIT lab for quite some time. But it's just now that you're able to actually incorporate that into a modern, you know, headphone form factor that everybody can start to use and you can scale. And so I'd say that we're fortunate to be at the forefront and to be existing at the right time where all of these different technologies have culminated together. And it's really a first mover's advantage that's kind of giving us the leg up, I would say, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you guys kind of covered all of it already from a science standpoint. I think the only thing I'll add is I think from a societal standpoint, everyone has kind of realized that the brain and neuroscience is kind of like the last area of medicine that we really don't know anything about, and I just think there's a much larger focus now on trying to understand it, and that is leading to a lot of people trying to enter the space and answer different pieces of the puzzle, it feels like.
Yeah, I think amazing answers, and I think I'll just map to what, I used to be CTO of a company called Sleep Number, and we were using this commercial of the great sensors, and from there we could drive cardiac signals. And the aha moment for us was the AI part. Like from using those HRV, heart rate, we could build models that could detect insomnia, COVID, and many things. So it was just mind-blowing that how much with commercial sensors you can do. So AI, I think, is very promising with miniaturization and all that. So let's go to a debate. Like you guys represent very different philosophies. Like with the brain-computer interface, intrusive versus non-intrusive. So maybe you can touch upon from your perspective, Paradromics compared to, there's a very famous guy who has a company also. So how do you compare to that? And then between the two approaches, do you see different applications? Are they complementary, or they, what you expect a world where both exist? And what are the applications? Like, will I just think about things and it will happen, or?
Okay. We have one prominent competitor in our particular space, which is Neuralink, Elon's company. I'll tell you where Paradromics and Neuralink kind of think similarly, which distinguishes us, I would say, from the other people on stage, which is just we're very, very focused on getting the highest data rate possible for enabling next-gen applications. And so when you're trying to get as much data out of the brain as possible, the richest data source is the firing of individual neurons. And the currency is basically how many neurons can you record or stimulate. And so that's pushed Neuralink and Paradromics down this path of building really high channel count neural recording systems. Now, the place where Neuralink and Paradromics are quite different is we started in a really anchored in therapy. I think the first 20 years of people who are getting brain-computer interfaces will be people who have serious unmet medical needs. And when you talk to people who are going to get a brain implant, they'll tell you, I don't want to undergo neurosurgery. Like, I think the ideal number of neurosurgeries to undergo is 0, and if you need it, the next best number is 1. And so we focused from the get-go at building a device that would last for 10 plus years so that patients wouldn't have to replace it right away. Elon, as you know, like, he had a dream of going to Mars, and then he fell back a little bit to building like a self-sustaining colony on the moon. He thinks pretty far out, and he's like, it's usually like plus or minus half a century. And he's living in a world where people already, every single person wants to get a brain implant. They want to get it replaced frequently. And because like you don't want to keep your phone for 10 years, that doesn't make sense. Someone else will have a cooler phone than you, and you'll only have the Neuralink 8, and someone will also have the Neuralink 9, and then you'll feel like shit. So like you've got to he wants to have like outpatient clinics like in a strip mall next to Party City where you just like roll up and get a new brain implant, and then like you're back at your home the next day. I don't know like when that happens. I don't know if that's pre or post Mars colony, but I'll tell you that the next 20 years of people who are getting brain implants don't want their brain implant to fall apart in the next 2 years. And so that kind of planned obsolescence model is not attractive. And so that's like, right now we have the highest data rate brain-computer interface in the world. It's logged 20x the speed of the Neuralink implant, and we don't expect it to fall apart or fall out. And so that's kind of where we are. But I would say that that's like, we don't think everyone needs a high data rate brain-computer interface. If you have an amputation and you can have something implanted in your muscles, I think you would be better off getting a phantom implant. If what you want is accessible from EEG, I have a pair of Ramsey's headphones. They're awesome. Like, I would absolutely encourage you to get these, and I would discourage you to get a first-generation Paradromics brain implant if you don't need it. And similarly, if you can go into a clinic and have someone do something with sort of wearable sensors and a camera, it doesn't make sense to get a diagnosis with an invasive brain implant. So I think like there's a place for all of these different technologies to kind of stratify according to risk and benefit.
Very good. Yeah. Very correct answer.
That was amazing.
I'm going to address the elephant in the room, which is, when is your Elon Musk shade comedy tour?
Kill Tony's next. Hell yeah.
This is recorded, guys. So like,
Hi, Elon.
TechCon.tv. So you'll
Big fan.
I'll be there. I'll buy tickets first front row. So I think Matt addressed it perfectly. There's it depends on where you are in the stage of your need, right? Like if you have a Fitbit, you're not going to want a what's it called? What they use on hearts to what's that? A pacemaker. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like if you don't how many of you want a pacemaker? Right? I hope none of you raise your hands, right? So it's like there's different needs for what you have, and whenever a VC, for example, asks me like, what is the difference between you and like Neuralink or Paradromics, I know probably not to take their check, right? Because they don't know enough about the space, right? But it's kind of like the word neuroscience. It tackles everything from like, mouse estrogen cycles all the way to like, controlling devices with prosthetic limbs, right? It's such a broad, neurotech is such a broad field that there's definitely space for a lot of players.
So I'm actually somewhere in the middle on this. I think for sure, like with a medical deficit, you should pick the least invasive technology possible in order to solve that deficit and to gain benefit from it. I also think that there's a convenience factor that comes into play with this. And I do believe that like the trend is less wearable technology or smaller wearable technology, right? And for certain use cases, minimally invasive implantable technologies that just go under your skin, right? So my example that I use a lot is like Dexcom glucose sensing. So everyone and their mother is now signing up to get that minimally invasive, quote unquote, technology because they have some perceived benefit from that, even though it's certainly not comfortable, it's certainly not convenient, and whatever. And I think ultimately people will elect to get something just inserted under their skin in a 5-minute, outpatient, I wouldn't even call that a procedure, if they then don't have to put on this Dexcom, bulky thing onto their skin all the time. If you look at modern day cosmetic plastic surgery, people are lining up, for miles to get their facelifts and tummy tucks and breast augmentation and fillers and all of that stuff, right? And so I think that today it's elective implants that don't have any like electronic function. That's the cosmetic plastic surgery stuff. But I think we're going to be trending in a direction where there are sensors incorporated into these implantable technologies. And like with joint replacements and things, they're starting to look at incorporating sensors into those implants and those systems. So we've designed our system where it just goes under the skin in your limb or your residual limb if you're an amputee. And I do believe that over time, not tomorrow, but over the coming 5, 10, 15 years, that people will elect to get a sensor system like ours placed under the skin that can allow them to wirelessly communicate with the technology around them, because I believe that people will see what amputees, for example, are able to do with an implantable system like this, and it won't take long for somebody who's able-bodied, who's kind of an early adopter for radical technologies, to say, oh, well, shit, I want that too. Like, I don't need to lose my limb to want to be able to do these incredible things, and then it will start to snowball from there. But I think still, like, having a very rational, safe approach to these things, rather than talking about that like everyone and their mother is going to end up getting these implantable invasive technologies. I don't think that's a rational approach to this. But over time, that will be the trend.
I think you make a really good point, though, that if there was a cosmetic benefit to any of these technologies, that's probably the quickest way to get any type of scale.
For sure, everyone wants to look good.
Yeah.
I just want to address like the badass stuff we're talking about up here, and it's like totally normal, right? We're talking about like cosmetic, biometric sensors and like implantable, mind reading, technology. Like it's incredible panel you put together.
So I think, so we've talked about technology, so let's move to the application. So if we close our eyes and look 5 years out, 10 years out, so each of you, and start with David this time, what are the applications, what are the use cases, how will each of your solutions be used potentially, and maybe cross-promotion also, like combination of each other's solution. So how do you see, like if somebody asks, so what? Like, what is, what it will do in 5 years or 10 years? So how do you answer that question?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that within the mental health space specifically, the largest issue by far is that there's no accurate way to make a diagnosis. And there's a whole bunch of residual things that are also issues, but they're a result of that. And there's kind of, I would say, even one foundational issue before that, which is there are actually accurate ways to diagnose mental health. The problem is it requires these very long-form diagnostic interviews, which take 2 to 3 hours of a very specialized psychologist or psychiatrist to administer and then to score. And as a result of it, I think it's like the last numbers that came out, 2% of patients were actually diagnosed in that way. And also, because there's such a major shortage of psychologists and psychiatrists, about 80% of all of mental health is diagnosed and treated exclusively inside of primary care. And so the fact that the diagnoses are so wrong and it's just these patient self-reported questionnaires that are being used is not because anyone's being negligent. It's just a result of there's not enough clinicians who are trained to do the work, and the primary care doctors are kind of stuck with it. The last surveillance study the NIH did, and this was 2019, so before COVID, showed that the best diagnosed mental health condition in the United States is major depression, and even it was misdiagnosed about 65% of the time. And depression is relatively easy to diagnose compared to other mental health indications. And then when you get to more complex conditions like PTSD, schizophrenia, bipolar, the misdiagnosis rate skyrockets to between 84 and 92%, with an average, if you take the best paper, it says 7 years, and you take the worst paper, it says 11 years, from when someone enters the mental health care system trying to get help to when they get the correct diagnosis. And so that's 7 to 11 years of you got the wrong diagnosis, you were treated for the wrong thing, and we kind of, a lot of times, and this is an opinion, I don't have a lot of facts to prove it yet, but we have a very large chronic anxiety and depression population that we think never gets any better. But I'd make the argument that a large amount of what we think is chronic anxiety and depression is misdiagnosed something else. It's just that if you treat it as anxiety or depression, you're treating one of the symptoms of the larger mental health condition, but not actually the kind of root thing. So to kind of like answer your question, 10 years from now. So at the end of this year, we're expecting FDA approval on our first indication, which is PTSD. By the end of next year, we're hoping we can have approval on a panel diagnostic across PTSD, anxiety, and depression. And our goal is, at some point, there's a wall. I don't think every mental health condition in the world is possible to be diagnosed with this, but we want to kind of expand to as many diagnoses as possible. And then there's also a severity monitoring over time aspect to what we're doing. So if you can not just diagnose, but on a weekly basis, you can see how the severity of the condition is changing, instead of just asking a patient every week, well, do you feel any better now? Do you want to change your dose? You can actually kind of in a more objective manner both titrate interventions, but also kind of help get the patient engaged in their own treatment and kind of show them the factors of how they are improving. And as much as there's like the clinical side of this, if you kind of flip it, there's like the pro athlete model as well, where it's not like what makes you sick necessarily, but it's like what are the factors, both a medical, exercise, sleep, whatever it is, that kind of puts you in the best possible mental health. And so, as everyone who's either suffered from mental health or kind of seen their family members, like it's kind of like a parasite that can hijack you. I think it's like the best way to explain it. And so the way we view what we're doing from a mission standpoint outside of the specifics is that if we can empower everyone to basically take charge of their own mental health, understand what the problem is, and understand what the factors are that can kind of get them back to a manageable state, that's essentially what we're trying to do. And so we want to basically enable folks to kind of take back control of their own lives.
Yeah. Connor?
That's awesome. So I think the next 5-10 years are going to be extremely exciting. So for Phantom in particular, so we're implanting upper limb amputees for our first clinical trial this year, first half of this year, so that they can control, again, robotic prosthetic limbs. And so I think over the next 5-10 years, we'll primarily be focused on amputation and prosthetics, as well as some like isolated like wrist drop and foot drop and wearable exoskeletons to create that. And so I think we're going to see a merging of kind of the humanoid robot space with the disability space, where you can take these limbs and the robotic advancements from humanoid robots, or human mimicking robots, I prefer, and use those as prosthetic limbs, and then have really precise control of those as if they're actual, biological limbs for a human, which will be really exciting. But also then, all of our technologies, I think, are dual use in nature, and I firmly believe that neurotechnology is ultimately like one of the most strategic technologies for global dominance, I would say. And so I think it's extremely important that the United States remain at the forefront of neurotechnology. And so, as we deploy more and more machines on the battlefield to augment a human's function, if you're not changing how the human actually interacts with these machines to capture value from them, the machines can only be so useful to somebody. And so I think that over the next 5-10 years, you're going to also see a lot of deployment of neurotechnology on the battlefield for these use cases. So it's going to be a very interesting next 5-10 years from my perspective.
And I think, Ramses, when you answered the question, I think you showed a consumer-grade product also. So maybe touch upon both, like, from a consumer angle, what's the next 5-10 years, and then...
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I'll start from the defense angle, because I do agree with what Connor's talking about. I mean, and I think it discusses like where we see the world going in the next 5 to 10 years. So right now, we work with the U.S. Army to help identify mild traumatic brain injury and traumatic brain injury in soldiers, right? We have some pilots going also in Ukraine right now. And what I think is really significant there is that 80% of traumatic brain injuries go undetected. And the reason for that is because somebody goes out into the field, they do their job, even if it's something like, for example, like just artillery training, those shock waves impact your brain. Long term, it makes it so that veterans have twice the likelihood of committing suicide. Like that's enormous, right? And it goes unseen. And I think that the way that I see the future is that this is the first time that we cannot be surprised by our brain again, right? The standard of care for things like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's is 10 years into the disease, right? The standard of care of so many diseases associated to our brain is essentially when it's too late. And the reason for that is because your brain is really good at hiding disease. It's an evolutionary trait. you don't want to be that animal in the savannah that's limping because you're going to get eaten. So, for example, with Parkinson's, sure, you can pick it up with an Apple Watch when you have a tremor, but you've been battling Parkinson's in your brain for the last 10 years. And it's only until your brain gave up that you finally pick it up with a wearable device that you currently have available to you. And so I see the work we're doing right now for traumatic brain injury as a step one into the future. And we'll have people actually email on the consumer side. They'll actually email us and they'll be like, my markers today are really strange. I don't know what's going on. Right? And it turns out that they had like either COVID or they're going to get an epileptic seizure or they're going to get a migraine. Right? So creating this future where you're not surprised by your mind again, by your brain again, that's really like the vision that I want to see. Because not only does it mean that we can finally take control of the most invisible organ in our body, but then two, we can start to do science earlier. Right? And a lot of the issues with these neurodegenerative diseases is that you're essentially tackling them once the damage is done.
If I look at the next places where implantable brain-computer interfaces are going to be used, I say, all right, on the motor side and on the sensory side, it's a neural engineering problem. We know where sight and hearing are represented in the brain. We know we can stimulate those areas of the brain to produce the perception of sound and vision. We know where the signals to control our body are located, and we know that we can infer when someone's trying to move their hand, even if they're paralyzed, when they're trying to speak, even if they can't speak any longer. We can tell those things already. And one of the reasons why we can do these things now is because there have been decades of animal experiments done where people have painstakingly mapped out the sensory and motor areas, and those have translated well to humans. If we start thinking about some of the areas that we're most interested in, mental health, there's actually not a lot of good data from inside of the brain at single neuron resolution to understand how do things like chronic depression, schizophrenia manifest at a circuit level. And one of the reasons for that is because there aren't great animal models, and it's not really appropriate to go into a person and start poking around. But I think something is changing now with the advent of high data rate systems being used in the clinic in trials for Paradromics and Neuralink. A lot of brain areas we're talking about dual use. Brain areas are basically multi-use. They're used not only for directing motor signals, but the same executive control signals that are sequencing what someone's going to say or how someone's going to move their arm are involved in other areas of executive function, cognition, mood. And so we're going to start having devices throughout the brain in early indications, especially on the motor side. And we'll be placing more and more modules in different areas of the brain to make people's prosthetics better, to make their speech production better. But we'll start collecting all of this ancillary data, and we'll have people who have comorbidities. And so we'll start seeing how that neural activity correlates with mental health conditions. And we're going to start now building the neuroscience foundation to do neural engineering in the cognitive space. And so I think that's coming a lot faster than most people think. I think when people think of brain-computer interfaces and where it's going, they're like, oh, the Matrix and a lot of the kind of Neuralink narrative, and they maybe over-index on that kind of stuff, and they under-index on the near-term really cool stuff that's going to happen in mental health.
Okay, so the next question is about neural data. So you guys are untapping a new entity that was not accessible before. So my first question is, how private is it? Just like DNA, should be considered like that? Who owns it? How do you protect it? All the data that you're extracting, and do you expect there will be guidelines established around it, legislative or whatever that might be, or we'll let the commercial companies hopefully keep it safe?
Neural data, I would say, exists in kind of a quasi-regulated space. Anything that's related to a healthcare condition would be covered under HIPAA, but there are certain kinds of neural data that would maybe not be covered under HIPAA, but people would still consider private. I would say within our company is part of a brain-computer interface collaborative community that works with the FDA and a bunch of other companies and kind of ethicists and researchers. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is, as I was describing the brain areas as dual use, you'll end up picking up a lot of information from brain areas that aren't related to the indication that they've been prescribed for. Even now we're seeing from motor cortex that there are kind of traces of non-verbalized speech, so that a device that's meant to be picking up someone's intent to speak, even when they don't necessarily intend to speak, but they're just thinking something quietly, like reading a book, there's a little bit of a signature of that, not as clear, but there's some information from that. And so it becomes an engineering problem then to make sure that you're gating what was meant to be spoken versus what was meant to be thought privately. And then it's both an engineering and a kind of ethics issue, because you don't want, you know, a Facebook approach where people are hoovering up your data and then monetizing it.
How do
Yeah,
you-
I mean, I'm very fortunate that my co-founder is a neuroethicist, so we talk a lot about this. And, you know, there's a few things that we came to, which is one, that some of these regulations and rules have kind of already been established to a certain degree, right? We just need to apply them to the neuroscience side of things. Like, we have data policy. You know, we screwed up on the internet with cookies. Like, all right, like, we should take accountability for that as a society. But like, we can do a better job now that we've learned from that lesson, and there are data policy information out there, including HIPAA. And so, at least from our perspective, you know, it's at the end of the day, it's going to be the consumer that decides what's valuable to them. You know, like for us as a company, we try to make sure we don't send raw data through the device. It's the data's meant for you. If you want it deleted, you can get it deleted. We actually don't profit from the data, so we built a business model where selling data does not make us more money, right? We did that on purpose so that, because the reason that people do data, like they violate data ethics, is because it's profitable to make money off of your data, right? And so from the core, we decided to build our business model in a completely different way. But at the end of the day, there's going to be other neurotech companies out there that are going to use your data in different ways. And so I think the ultimate decision is going to be, sure, there's going to be regulation that's happening. We're already seeing that right now across multiple states. But it's going to be the buyer that decides how much data, you know, privacy they're willing to give up for the amount of convenience or value that they get out of the product that they buy.
Makes sense. Yeah. Anything you guys want to add? Or?
I don't really have anything extra to that. I mean, that pretty much sums it up. I think it's early days with this, and I think that, you know, we're treating it as protected health information, and, you know, not planning on selling somebody's data or anything along those lines. But I also think that, like, if we over-regulate the neurotechnology space, similar to the AI space, right? If you over-regulate it too early, then you're going to stop a lot of innovation. And there is a lot of opportunity to utilize this data as like a data layer for training humanoid robots, for example, right? So the data will undeniably be a valuable data set, but that's still a ways away, I would say.
Yeah. So when I was forming this panel,
Wait, can I just add one
Sure.
more thing? I think another reason why it's important not to overregulate is, you heard Ramsey saying, I actually think we're picking up biomarkers for things like when people are getting sick, or his company probably will know if you have early stage Parkinson's before you do. And so I think we want to be careful, because there's a common good that can be served from pooling data across users, that we may be able to discover therapies and discover use cases. And so we don't want to be so restrictive that with data that we lose those opportunities to develop new cures.
Yeah, I would totally agree. So, you know, until today, you've had to go into a lab or into a clinic in order to put sensors on and access data within your body, which is not scalable at all. And yet we've still been able to learn so much with that lack of scalability of these sensors. We're now entering this period where it's extremely scalable to get data from the body, and we're going to learn so much more than we have previously over the past decades.
I'm just going to jump on this train real quick, because I totally agree with you guys. And actually, this is the difference between sick care and longevity. Like, sick care is when you go to the doctor because you learn you have Parkinson's, right? Longevity is managing your baseline, knowing this information ahead of time, and then managing that baseline over your lifetime, right? The reason preventative medicine doesn't work is because nobody wants to go to the doctor that often, right? But what if you could go to the doctor when you needed to go to the doctor because you had some sort of device that made it convenient for you, privately, but convenient for you? And that's the innovation that we shouldn't be trying to restrict.
So I think we are almost out of time. So last just comment or question. When I was forming this panel, I think except Ramses, hopefully will be a California native soon. Rest of the folks are from Austin. So is it true that for starting a neurotech company, you have to move to Austin? Is that what you guys are saying?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So with that, thank you to the panel. Amazing set of founders and CEO.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.